And we are recording. So now we move on to the controversial bit, or the thing that's most likely for people to disagree with. Well, thing other than the fact that like there's a lot of times where the fact that I've done a lot more modern boxing, period boxing, kind of shows through my technique. I think there's a few times I'm like, oh shit, I've just come back to this guard rather than this guard. But yeah, the one that where like I actually think I think I'm right and people might disagree is when it comes to sparring. So with bare knuckle boxing, like there's different ideas about how to train and practice. With 19th century boxing, it's a bit easier because gloves had really been around since the early 19th century. They were mandatory in a lot of boxing competitions, like Marquis of Queensberry, I think was like mid 1800s with that rule set. Although it's important to remember that bare knuckle boxing and Queensberry boxing with gloves were did have a period of coexistence. I believe up until there was a really high profile death, someone died in the ring, and so the authorities moved in and said, hey, like let's ban bare knuckle, and you have to wear gloves for safety. Yeah, with 19th century, the techniques work with and without gloves. So you can get gloves for it. I've done this these are 16-ounce gloves, and they work fine. I find they're reasonably good. They're very padded, and so so with one of these, the advantage is I can throw about as hard as I would need to hurt someone bare knuckle with one of these, and it's very unlikely to cause more than like mild discomfort, more than sort of feel worse than just being bumped into in a crowd kind of thing. Within that, there are two things that you need to do. The first is, so I can just slip my hand in and out of this. I'm not wrapping this around tight. I don't want to do anything that will support my wrist. I want my wrist to be able to move because I need to learn how to hold my wrist when I'm hitting. Like one of the things I like about these is just boxing like this. If you punch someone like straight at the top of the head, you can feel that you've done that. If you punch someone in the elbow, you can feel you've done that. Just also when you're sparring, if you're punching someone so hard that if you punch them in the elbow, you hurt your fist, you're going too hard. But I find these are a great kind of training tool. And with 19th century boxing, it is a period thing. The other thing you really want to avoid when you're training is hand wraps. Again, you don't want anything that reinforces your wrist or supports your wrist. And you especially don't want these sort of things because they wrap your fist up so tight that they turn it into a club, into a big club, which certainly does more damage. And I do suspect that the reason why modern boxing is considered more dangerous than bare knuckle has less to do with the gloves and more to do with the wraps. But that's another controversial topic, I guess. But yeah, you don't want to wrap your fists at all. The other thing you want to do as well to protect your wrist, so safety rather than just protective gear, but also from protecting your own wrists, is you want to practice on a heavy bag with either bare fist or you might want some light leather gloves, like basic fencing gloves or riggers gloves or something like that, if you don't want to skin your knuckles too bad. The other thing that's good, I've had some good experiences with, is these, which are mixed martial arts gloves. They do hit harder, particularly to the body, so you can't go as hard as you could with these 16-ounce gloves. But they're smaller, and you can open your hand up to simulate grapples, and particularly if you're doing things like defense stance Larue or Batitsu, which have both grappling and striking components. I find these are good. The only exception is with these, this thing here, this little strap at the back, put this on. I can't wear this without the strap. I can't wear these without the strap. And the strap does give my wrist a lot of support. Like you can see how little I can move my wrist in these compared to even the 16-ounce gloves. So yeah, you do have to be careful with that. But in terms of gear to use, just get a mouth guard. Have multiple types of gloves. Honestly, gloves are pretty freaking cheap. you can, this is one of those systems where you can have get multiple weapons or multiple training tools, multiple training weapons for less than $50. You can pick up a mouth guard and a serviceable pair of 16-ounce gloves for not much money. The other things that I recommend is like the first and most fundamental skill when you're learning boxing is learn to pull your blows. One of the drills, one thing to do is practice punching with just holding your fist loose. Don't hold a full fist. Have your fist open and let it close with impact, because that will force you to pull your blow enough. And then when you get used to striking at that intensity, then start sparring with your fist closed. Because that will teach you basically kind of a good intensity go. The other thing is to learn not to flinch. And what I recommend with that is just, this is a method Percy Longhurst recommends. He says, just start by gently getting people to touch each other on the nose with the gloves. So just gently tapping to the nose. And what the other person does is you basically headbutt their fist that comes in. And that way you're controlling the power you're receiving. So you're getting more, so even though you're giving yourself a bit of a shake and a bit of a shock, you're controlling it. So it's very much easier to calm down and get used to being smacked in the face. And that will help teach you to not flinch and overreact, which is good certainly from the perspective of not over defending, throwing your arms up and leaving yourself open to being hit elsewhere. But it's also really important because flinchy fighters are the people who then start throwing big, powerful hits that might actually hurt their training partners. And if you're sparring, if you're sparring hard enough that anyone might get hurt, you're probably sparring too hard. I mean, it's something that you should maybe do once a year, if that, depending on what you want to get out of this. You should be able to spar without injury for the most part, and still learn this. The other advantage of the thing that Percy Longhurst recommends is he says you can do that in sparring, where people just start by just trying to touch each other on the nose, and then when one person starts, if one person is struggling, you teach them something else. If one person is winning too much, is dominating because they've learned a thing that helps them dominate. So you teach the other person one thing, the counter to that, one thing that will help them. And so that way you've got people who are sparring from day one, but consistently only adding a single technique every time. So learning to spar with just a jab and footwork is a lot easier than learning to spar with a whole bunch of different punches. And adding a single punch as you go, it's fairly easy to assimilate one new technique into your sparring every 2-3 lessons, rather than learning 3-4 techniques a lesson and then trying to assimilate them. So that's a really, really good way to learn. But yeah, I just thought I'd finish off with that, primarily because I really like bare knuckle boxing or traditional pugilism. So I do it with gloves from a period where gloves were one of the worst fairly common application of boxing. But I do like old school boxing, and I'd like to see more of it in HEMA. So I just thought I'd finish off by suggesting ways that people could get started. All right, well, that's pretty much the lesson. So the people who are watching it live can hang around for conversation. The people at home can, comment, share, subscribe, do social media calls to action. And yeah, hopefully, if you're not here with us tonight, you'll be able to join us down the track. So yeah.